What disgusting secret you found out about someone? My dad used to smoke substances and then film himself dressing up in women's clothes and doing his makeup. Poorly. That's not the disgusting part, though. The disgusting, funny, in an absurd way part is that when my mom found out about all that and other stuff, she found his hidden stash of dresses and presented them to me as gifts and told me I should wear them right away and show dad when he gets home. So I was just constantly parading around the house in my dad's pretty crack dresses, not understanding why he was weirded out. Story 2. Found out my uncle abused my mom, teens. She kept quiet about it until recently, 50s. Turns out he also did it to my aunt. Didn't mention it until mom did. Same dude I went to holiday dinners with, hikes, hugged, etc. She acted so normal around him, I had no idea. Edit. It's horrific how many people say the same story or something similar. If this is happening to you and the secret hasn't come out, please tell people for their safety. Commenter. My mother's father did the same thing to her from the time she was 7 until she was in her teens. I was 5 when I found out. The first and only time I can remember him trying to get me to sit in his lap caused my mother to freak out at Christmas. I have the visceral panic of my mother's ingrained in my memories. Over the next 2 years, my mother started telling people what happened, and she broke a multi-generational wheel. Multiple children had been abused by different people in the family. Story 3. Found out a coworker was microwaving their underwear at work to freshen them up after lunch breaks. It was an unpleasant revelation. Made me think twice about using that microwave ever again. Story 4. After my husband died in 2020, I found out he had been having an affair with a 30-year-old. He was 55. She apparently got an abortion. Everything he told me about his prior life was a lie. Second marriage for both of us. And he had been having sex with men since he was in his early 20s. To sum it up, I didn't know this man at all. We had been together 10 years and married for 6. Story 5. A guy had a decently successful restaurant in my town. He was community-oriented, donated time and money to the town. Just overall nice. There was something I always thought was off or fake about him. He tried expanding and buying a new restaurant, but needed a financial backer. They had a disagreement over something and she went missing. He took care of her son during her absence. Turns out he murdered her behind a manufacturing building. Really hit our town hard. Commenter, my partner and I lived in the apartments next to the place they were going to buy. Saw them walking around and checking out the property multiple times. We were pretty thrilled to have a new food spot going in. It was completely mind-blowing when we realized that was who went missing and who killed her. Story 6. When my grandfather passed away, we discovered that he did not exist. His name was not in any government registry. He was a normal citizen, paid taxes, had a license and everything, lived a long life, married to my grandmother for over 50 years, had multiple children, everything normal. Still to now, no one knows who he really was and why he had a false name. Story 7. This guy and my friend group's older brother was into young girls. However, this one time it ended very badly for him. He brought 2 girls to the sports complex he worked at late at night. They convinced him to let them tie him up on a flagpole sort of thing so they could give him a show and then do him. They tied him up real good, pulled his pants down, took his car keys, and left him there. Well deserved. Story 8. I had an uncle that went to prison for some time for allegedly trying to kill my aunt. Years and years later, after both my aunt and uncle had passed away, my cousin, male, told me the real story. She had been molesting him for years when he was little, and when my uncle caught her, he flipped out and tried to kill her. During the confrontation, she cut off part of his hand. He went to prison. She got nothing. My cousin had an absolutely awful childhood. Absolutely insane. Story 9, not really a secret, but definitely a shocking discovery. There was a weird kid in my school that got expelled for touching himself in the library. He was always kind of odd, but he lived down the street and was always nice to me. I dated his sister briefly and would always say hi when I saw him because I honestly just kind of felt bad for him. Fast forward like 10 years and me and my roommate were looking up people we went to school with on the docket finder as a joke. Remembered the weird kid and wouldn't you know it, locked up for violently assaulting. It wasn't funny after that point. Exited out and never spoke of it again. Story 10. I saw my grandfather only 2 times once when I was around 4 or 5, and then again when I was about 13 at my uncle's funeral. I asked my mom what the deal was, and she would just tell me he was not a good person. I just stopped asking until a few years ago and she gave me the whole story. He was a vile, sadistic, evil person, abusive to his family in just about every way imaginable. Story 11. My dirtbag uncle convinced my grandmother to hand over her power of attorney to him and then proceeded to sell her house and put her into a senior living home when she was only in her 50s. He left her there to rot and then threw out most of her belongings and absconded with all of the family heirlooms from my great-grandfather, who was a famous artisan. In the intervening years, he pawned off most of the heirlooms as he continued to scam his way across the country. Last I heard, he had somehow swindled his way into being a judge in Montana. He tried calling my dad a year or so ago and lying about what he had done to my grandmother. My dad called him out on that crap. and the dirtbag hasn't tried contacting any of us since. Now that my sister and I are grown living on comfortable wages, we have been slowly buying my great-grandfather's works as we see them appear up for auction or on eBay to bring them back into the family. A couple of years ago, we found one of my great-grandfather's pieces that my dad had thought to be lost forever and surprised him with it for Christmas. I don't think I've ever seen him more overjoyed than he was that day. Story 12. There were rumors when I was a teen that a friend of mine was being molested by her stepdad. Adults were told, but nothing came of it, and she went through emancipation as soon as she was old enough. I learned later on that stepdad was having his way with all the children in the house. Male and female, step and biological, 5 kids. The thing that disgusts me the most is that for the first time in my life, I talked to somebody about it and learned that a lot of people in town knew it was going on. She and I were 11 years old, but the adults should have helped those kids. Teachers knew. The principal of our school knew. I don't have all the details as to why they weren't removed from the home, but there's no reason or excuse for all of them to stay in that place with that man for years. Story 13. My first babysitter, next-door neighbor's kid, attacked her mother with an axe. Her mother survived and shared this in her Christmas letter to friends and family years later. Story 14. My family doctor, between the ages of 15 and 23, was charged by several women for assaulting them. He once did a physical for me and made me remove my entire shirt plus bra with no gown. I thought it was normal at the time. He also always touched my tattoos and asked what they meant. Super creepy looking back on it. Commenter, I was an adult who went to a chiropractor for the first time. He asked me to undress, and I just followed instructions. Several guys from my company saw him, so I thought everything was normal. During the third visit, he pressed his erect banana against me and told me to come back at the end of the day and he'll spend more time with me. I told my coworker, who was furious. He Googled the chiropractor and 1. He was out on bail for molesting patients. 2. Was not allowed to see female patients in a closed room setting. A detective came to interview me and the chiropractor went to jail. I Google his name every couple of years. Somehow, after a short stint in jail, he became a high school tennis coach. A year after that, he was again in jail for molesting several students. Story 15. My first boyfriend, that I knew since kindergarten, became a Baptist preacher. A few months ago, he was arrested for assaulting 2 other ladies. The news floored me and made me so sick. Story 16. My dad's dad abused him when he was a child. He told my mom about a year before he died. Then she told me. We were both shocked. He never gave any indication prior. I knew my grandfather suffered from PTSD from WW2, but wow. He didn't say if it was once or ongoing. Apparently, no one knew but us. I don't know if his brother knew. They weren't very close. All these people are dead now, so I'll never know all of the story. My dad died in 1998 at 57 of cirrhosis of the liver. Now that I just turned 56, I realize how young that is. Story 17. My great-grandfather stole money from an American school district in the 1940s and funneled it to the Nazis. He was part of the bunch. When he was caught stealing, he died at a golf course. They never recovered the money. Story 18. I went to church for a long time, and there was this guy who everyone loved. He was a kind of fat guy with silly humor, but he seemed a little off because he had autism. One day I was on YouTube and a predator-catching video popped up. He was in it, and his shirt was about Jesus. I sent it to the pastor, and he was removed from the church. Now I want to work in cybercrime to catch these people at it. This happened when I was 18, and he was always complimenting me. Once asked if I was interested in modeling. Story 19? My ex accused me of cheating so many times that it finally drove me nuts enough to end it. I ended up finding out that she was cheating on me the entire time with multiple men, and one of those times was a threesome with 2 dudes. She's blocked on everything, and still tries to get in contact with me any way she can. Story 20. I worked with a woman for years, knew her fairly well. Later found out that she and her husband were the ringleaders of the local swingers organization. My only problem with it was that she never invited me. Story 21. My friend confided that her and her brother got drunk and get sex recently. I am friends with both of them. It's the weirdest crap hanging out and pretending you don't know. Story 22. This local kid was kind of slow. My best friend, from 7th grade to adulthood, hung out with him when we were in elementary school. People used to tell him to do wild crap and he would do it. He and his sister lived in a foster home, and one day, they disappeared around 6th grade. My best friend later told me his sister wore a diaper until she was 11, and the brother almost died from huffing paint at 10. My friend wasn't there, but that's when he stopped hanging around them. Fast forward 10 years, his sister is on MTV True Life about runaway prostitutes. 10 years after that, my best friend runs into him, and he says they were removed from the home for being molested by his foster family. His sister has been missing for 7+ years, and he's living with the foster mother who molested him. Story 23. An ex of mine had a drunk, violent dad. It got so bad, her mom finally wanted to split up when she was 2. Her dad and a friend got drunk and beat her. Her grandfather tried to intervene and got knocked down. The friend fled because he thought the old man was dead. He wasn't. When his son-in-law's back was turned, he got up and killed him because he kept attacking her mom. Of course, it was ruled self-defense. When she was about 10, her mom got a new boyfriend, with whom she had another girl. This was his princess, but he abused my ex, not by touching, but verbally, and forcing her to watch 18-plus movies with him all day while they were alone. I never believed he didn't touch her, but that's what she told me. Went on for years until her mom finally believed her and kicked the guy out 5 or 6 years later. Sister always blamed her for kicking out her beloved dad. Only about 20 years later, she finally forgave her and then had her own issues with guilt. My ex never got over all that. She drank in college like 1 bottle of Jack a day and had 1 or 2 unhealthy affairs. She started to hate men with a passion and thought all loving fathers are just monsters with a mask. But deep down, she wanted a normal life and family. She chose me, and we really tried. 3 months, but then she decided she wasn't ready after all. She was 29 by then. She knew me because I was actually friends with her sister, and we had the same cynical humor, and she was gorgeous. I always felt like I failed her because I didn't try hard enough or made her uncomfortable somehow. The whole relationship was mainly texts, and 1 or 2 evenings a week was all she could stomach. Then we drifted apart and only stayed Facebook friends. When she turned 40, she finally lost that long struggle with her demons and she took her own life. For all that time, I thought I failed her and felt guilty, debating whether to go to the funeral. Her sister invited me. I took my courage and went there, feeling like an outsider, as if I somehow had contributed to her losing. If only thing had gone better. Blah, blah. When I arrived, her sister and mother spotted me. There were easily 200 people there. They made a beeline for me and both hugged me and thanked me for being there. Her sister then and there told me she's so glad I came, and my ex would have been so happy to see me there, and she had told her years later. Those 3 months with me were her happiest time she ever had in life. I bawled my eyes out for at least an hour before I just hadn't anything left. She loved books and reading and made her a beautiful headstone in the form of an open book. Talk about catharsis. I wrote a letter to her mom and sister where I said they shouldn't be sad for her. They should be proud of her strength, fighting so many decades against demons that would have killed a weaker person much, much earlier. I think when she turned 40, she just thought the life she really wanted would never happen for her, and that's what made her give up. I wish I would have talked to her more, or she would have come to me, but I don't feel guilty anymore. She was headstrong, and if she had wanted to see me, she would have contacted me. I still had the same phone number and Facebook. Edit. Of course I didn't find the whole story disgusting about her. I found the dads that failed her disgusting. And it's a warning to not take stuff like that lightly and how it can ruin someone's life forever. Story 24. Girl who bullied me all through middle school. Found out her dad abused her and her sister from the time they were little until he died when they were teenagers. Drank himself to death. Now as an adult, when I go visit home, I make time to see her. I know her children. We have coffee at her house and sit on the porch or in the kitchen and chat. We hug before I leave. Story 25. That my mom cheated on my dad for 20 years and still hasn't told him to this day. I'm still trying to figure out what to do and how to go about the situation and exposing the truth about her to my dad, but I'm afraid he would die of a broken heart. Worst thing is, she cheated with my godfather, who used to come to the house and drink coffee with my mom and dad every day. Story 26. My former best friend, who I looked up to, and was a big brother figure to me. He is in Fed prison for 14 years for coercion and solicitation, and he wanted to do unspeakable things with his victims. I just found this out 3 years ago. Story 27. I found out my uncle tried to murder my mom when she was like 18 because she got into the Air Force Academy. She had just come home to my grandparents' house, where they all lived, to get ready to go celebrate the news and have dinner. He came into her room and immediately punched her in the face and knocked her head into her vanity mirror, then tried to strangle her before my granny and grandpa rushed in and pulled him off of her. Apparently afterwards, they tried to sweep it under the rug and say he'd just had a bad moment and that she shouldn't tell anyone because it would only hurt him, and by extension, their family and potentially their immigration status to the US. They came from the UK. Yeah, no pressure. I forgive my granny for that because she was a left-handed girl growing up on an apple farm in Ireland during the 20s and 30s who got beaten and raw by her teachers and religious leaders until she forced herself to become ambidextrous. And my grandpa was a product of his time and religion who still ascribed to the keeping up appearances mantra. A decent man relative to his peers, he hated racism. Super smart, was on the team that invented the inkjet home printer from HP, but he would be canceled today for his other attitudes. My uncle was the eldest child of 4, my mom was the youngest, and he'd developed some kind of seizure disorder in his late teens, which kept him from joining the military. And that was a huge problem because every male in the family line for generations had been in the service. He'd been good at sports, a rising star in baseball, in fact. Then all of that was taken away from him by his own brain's betrayal. One day his seizures caused him to get into some kind of accident I haven't heard many details about, but the result was some pretty serious scarring on his face and neck. This was all prior to the attack on my mom. I hope it doesn't sound like I'm trying to make excuses for him, but I was raised to understand people and their motivations for the things they do before judging them for those things. I don't know if he should have gone to prison, but he sure as crap should have gone to a psych ward and entered a program to help him deal with the grief he felt about his hopes and dreams for his future. That's my assessment of why he did it anyways. He was so broken by his body failing him and then being literally visibly scarred for life at age 21 that when he heard his youngest sister, who was already the black sheep of the family for choosing not become a nun, wasn't just getting into the Air Force, but actually the Air Force Academy, he must have seen red and felt such intense anger at the universe and grief towards his own aspirations dying that he attacked his own sibling. That in no way excuses what he did, mind you, but I think it's important to know the motivations of people who do awful things so the rest of us can do our best to prevent those motivating factors from affecting the people in our lives, and hopefully keep everyone else from even wanting to do awful things, let alone actually doing them. Story 28. The kid that lived in the house next door to me grew up to be a molester. He was my age when he lived next door, around 6 or 7, and used to come over and hang out in my backyard. At some point, he became intensely interested in seeing my, banana. He would ask repeatedly what mine looked like and ask to see it. He was all for, you show me yours and I'll show you mine. I thought this was weird and refused to compare it with him. He and his family moved away a few years later. I never saw him again. Decades later, out of morbid curiosity, I Googled his name and found his arrest and conviction record in another state. He had been a respected member of his professional community in a profession involving children. They were busted, and my childhood pal spent some time in prison. Story 29. Someone I went on 6 dates with and had incredible chemistry with suddenly said he got an AIDS diagnosis and couldn't handle dating. I learned it was because he was dating me only to get information and eventually contact info for my ex who had had a crush on for years. They hooked up on and off for a year before I learned he had gone through my Facebook one night and got all the info and reached out to my ex. Story 30. Not really a secret, but years later when I look back, it's eye-opening. When I was teen, me and 4 pals were befriended by this 40-year-old guy that owned a gym. Not a big fancy gym, like a little sweatbox gym like from a Rocky movie. Anyway, he would let us have the keys to the gym to let ourselves in before and after hours. Anyway, he was a real bullcrafter, karate world champion. Helped do fight scenes for movies, etc. He taught kids karate classes at the gym, and rumors started circling when he spurned one of the kids' mom's advances. So he befriends my group of mates and has them doing chores around the gym, etc. He didn't seem to like me, thankfully, as I was a banana lippy kid and I didn't want to spend my weekends cleaning up his crap hole of a gym. A few of my other friends actually used to cancel our plans to go and help him do DIY, etc. Now this is where things get weird. I heard him asking other lads to pose for his nudist magazine. He didn't have a magazine. Also took them to a lake to practice stealth maneuvers, which involved my mates standing in their boxers and rubbing lard on each other, similar to how people used to do with goose fat before wetsuits. I'm glad me and my other pal weren't liked by him as we had too much mouth. Fast forward 17 years and me and my wife buy our first house. Turns out he lives across the road, so I do some digging. At that point, he was operating some phone line where desperate people phone up and he gives them pishtik readings over the phone for money. Apparently he's psychic now. Then he got bitten by a tick and got Lyme disease, which left him blind and paralyzed. Actually not sure if he's dead now. So there isn't no concrete evidence, but I think I was onto him pretty early, which is why I wasn't invited to do anything, and he just stole my friends away at 13. If you are still alive, you know who you are, and I'm onto you. Creepy git. Story 31. My uncle beat up his wife. It's hard to look at a guy the same way after hearing that, and being grouped in with people like him kills me. Oh, when I found out my dad threw a glass ashtray at my mom while she was holding me as a baby, and she had to spin around taking it to the head so it didn't hit me. Finding out my other uncle was a professional snitch. Finding out my aunt was a crack escort. Finding out a lot of people were afraid of me when I'm terrified of everyone. The brother I thought was my full brother isn't, etc. Story 32. I found out my then BF molested his sister and her friend. I walked out on him, too triggering, and at first, he tried to play the victim and claimed he'd apologized to his sister. Then he admitted not only was it all true, that he'd lied about trying to make amends with his sister, and he'd never apologized. He never went to therapy or a support group, or even made the slightest attempt to get at the root of what he did. Story 33. My high school coach was arrested for getting 2 minors. From a different school, he was a coach at multiple local high schools drunk. I found out because I just so happened to be watching the news one night. The most messed up part about the situation was my school didn't even tell anyone. And when I tried to write a story about it for the school newspaper to make everyone aware of the situation, it was vetoed. Not sure if he was convicted of anything or if he settled outside of the court. Story 34. I grew up in a very religious family, church 3x a week, and went to Catholic school. The priest who built our parish was beloved by all. but just gave me ick vibes. In the early 2000s, someone from his previous parish, 30 years before, claimed he was inappropriate with them. Of course, no one believed it and assumed she was saying that for money. A couple of years ago, a friend from school posted on Facebook that she was looking for other girls from school. He abused because she couldn't believe she was the only one. I was close to her growing up and had no idea. She didn't ask for a penny from the church, and still is a dedicated member of the church. The priest has since passed. I 100% believe her, as her accusation only hurt her within the community, but helped her heal from the trauma. Story 35. Had a really creepy manager at my first job. He would say the most inappropriate, out-of-pocket sexual things all the time. He always talked about liking Asian girls because they looked young and innocent, and even seemed disappointed when I said I wasn't Asian. I eventually ended up reporting him, and he got transferred to a different store. I moved away for college shortly after and left that job and tried to forget him. One day, I got a message from a coworker from that job with a link to S mugshot and arrest info for our old manager. He was locked up for abusing a child. I felt so much guilt for so long, thinking if I had pushed it more, maybe he would have gotten in trouble sooner. Story 36. GF, now wife, had a roommate in college that was dating an older guy. I went over and saw him. Something was off. Did some research. He was her band director when she was in HS, was fired for having relations with a student, and was living just across the county line. Unbelievable ick. Story 37. My cousin realized through therapy that he had been molested multiple times by his father. It happened when he was so young that he suppressed the memory. When he finally remembered, he's in his 40s. He confronted his dad, and he denied it at first, and then finally came clean, but no apology. My cousin's mom is taking her husband's side and basically thinks he did nothing wrong. Absolutely disgusting. They have been completely cut out of the entire family. Story 38. And in high school, I was friends with a guy who would talk about his twin sister a lot. One day, he confessed to me that him and his twin sister doing dirty thing. I went to my older sister to ask what to do because I was freaked out. She told me to mind my business. Well, fortunately, he had loose lips, and someone else did report him. Him and his sister were removed from one another. I met his dad once when I was the driver for the group of US teens, only one who had a car. I was 17 at that point. His dad kept trying to give me beer and shots while I kept declining. His uncle was kissing an 18-year-old girl we had with us. She was drunk. I forced her to leave with me and took her home along with the boys. They were being creeps too, so I put her in the front seat next to me where I could monitor her. I was so uncomfortable, man. We both went into the military so we could go to college, different branches. He got kicked out and diagnosed with schizophrenia. His dad died of kidney failure from alcoholism. Yay for being born to low socioeconomic status. Story 39. When I was in around 8 or 9, I went over to my friend's house to play Nintendo, and his older brother was there with one of his friends I'd never met before. I think they were 15, 16-ish. Just thought I was hanging out with some cool older kids. When I got home, my mom asked where I was and who I was with. I told her, and when I mentioned the name of the older brother's friend, he had a unique name. My mom became very alarmed. She knew him. When he was 12 or 13, he abused one of her friend's son when he was 5. She was also friends with the nurse who treated the boy after the assault. Needless to say, she made me swear I would stay away from the new, older kid. Word got around the neighborhood. I lived in a subsidized housing community where you had to have kids to qualify to live there, so everyone there was a parent and understandably freaked out about a known predator hanging around. My memory is hazy on the details, but to my understanding, he was given a clear message to not come around anymore. I never saw him again. I went to high school with the kid that was assaulted. We had a few mutual friends. I tried to be friendly, but I could tell he was uncomfortable, that I knew what had happened to him. I understood how he felt, kept my distance, and never told a soul. I hope he's doing well. Story 40. I'm on disability in my country. And a few years ago, my old disability caseworker popped up on my people you might know on Facebook against my better judgment. I looked at her profile. I was all racist stuff and posts about how much she hates disabled people. And she wished they would all die, and tons of racism towards basically everyone, even pictures in blackface. I did report her, but nothing happened. She still works at this disability office as far as I know. Story 41. Back in college, I had a roommate who seemed pretty normal at first. Quiet, kept to himself, and always had his headphones in. But after living with him for a few months, I started noticing some weird crap. First, there was a strange smell that would occasionally come from his side of the room, but I just figured it was old food or something. I didn't think much of it. Until one day, I came back early from class and caught him red-handed. This dude was in the middle of peeing in a plastic bottle. I'm not talking about being in a rush or doing it one time as an emergency. No, he had dozens of these bottles full lined up under his bed like it was some twisted collection. Some of them were even capped and dated, like he was keeping track of his piss like it was fine wine or something. I was disgusted. I asked him why he didn't just use the bathroom that was literally 10 feet away from our room, and he said I crap you not that he was too lazy to walk to the bathroom sometimes. Too lazy. So instead of getting up and taking 10 steps to the bathroom, he preferred to piss in bottles and store them under his bed like some kind of demented hoarder. The worst part, he didn't even seem ashamed. He acted like it was completely normal, like I was the weird one for being grossed out. Needless to say, I moved out not long after. I couldn't look at him, or those goddamn bottles, the same way again. Story 42. A Korean exchange student in my calculus class and tennis team was a nice guy, a year below me. When I went to college the next year, he was arrested and jailed for abusing his host families, a teacher at the school members. Story 43. There was a guy who was friends with people in my friend group. He was actually the older stepbrother of a guy in our friend group. Not sure why, but I never liked him. One time at a party at a friend's place who had off-road trails on his property, many of us had purchased beater jeeps and trucks to leave there and hit the trails with. He got drunk and was mad. A bunch of us had trucks to hit those trails with, probably because everyone partying there ended up getting into our beaters and cruising the trails, including all the girls there who were like 8 years younger than him. He decided to take his Crown Victoria, his only vehicle, out on the trails when we got back. Everyone told him not to. He tried getting girls to ride with him. Everyone said no. We actually tried to take his keys and he flipped out, proceeded to get in, gun it down a trail and roll his car, that he needed to go to work. Woke up in the morning freaking out at everyone. Just the kind of stupid, short-sighted crap he did trying to impress girls almost a decade younger than him. I never liked the guy. Well, it turns out he was an abuser. Target, a local campus, with like a half dozen victims that came forward at least. Waited in parking lots, broke into houses through windows, sprayed them with mace, just all sorts of ducked-up crap. Now everyone just acts like he never existed. Story 44. Worked as a team manager in a corporate call center. Being a manager, you are not supposed to fraternize or befriend workers beneath you. To just avoid any issues, most managers really only went on breaks with other managers, spoke to other managers, etc. I was introduced to one of them by another who I had known for a while. Right off the bat, first impression, the guy kind of gave me the creeps. He was kind of greasy, had gross teeth from years of doing chew, and just kind of gave me a really gross vibe. I mentioned it later when he wasn't around to the guy who had introduced me to him and kind of just asked how well he knew him, and if he had ever gotten a similar feeling. I was assured, nah, he's a good dude, big college football fan. I convinced myself that I was just being judgmental. Worked with the guy for about a year until he was moved to a different contract. I didn't make any attempt to befriend him, nor did I make attempts to avoid him, but always kept any contact short and work-related. He was just another guy that worked at the same company. However, I always felt there was just something off about him. Cut to about 5 years later. That company had closed down. I turn on my TV, and the local news is on. It's his face, and he's clearly in an orange jumpsuit. He was charged with operating a CP ring, specifically producing and distributing. I was shocked, but also kind of not shocked. I guess it was a lesson to trust my instincts, and I will never forget it. If someone instantly gives you the creeps, trust that feeling. Story 45. I work in a small office, just me and 2 other women. The other day I walked into the restroom as one of the co-workers exited a stall. She turned the faucet on, briefly got her fingers wet, not her actual hands, and walked out. I've worked with her for 16 years and just now learned she doesn't wash her hands after using the restroom. It's stuff like this that makes me not eat the office potluck. Gross. Story 46. The girl I had a crush on for ages became newly single. We hit it off after years, and she agreed to have dinner with me. We went to Chili's, and while she was absolutely demolishing the southern egg rolls, when she casually, and I mean very casually, told me that she left her ex because her son was no longer entertaining her, the date ended abruptly. I pretended to get an important text from my mom telling me to help her out with something and left. I called a friend to ask how to even approach this. I went to the police, and they told me to bug her off. If I don't have proof of some kind that was legally obtained, then there's nothing they can do. When I did try to record her saying it, audio, she refused to share any details on her hobby because she thought I left and I was shaming her. She never clearly admitted what she had told me the previous day, so I have no way of getting this looked at further by any sort of official. Story 47. My ex-close friend married a man who was once babysitting an infant and sat her to see what it felt like. This man often was in contact with my daughters, and I only found out when his best mate tearfully contacted me to say it had been messing with his head for the 20 years he knew about it. It's so ducked up. Story 48. My childhood best friend died in the woods, far, far away, where we used to do week-long wilderness canoe trips. At first I was told, by his family, that he had a bad day at work and went off to see what it looked like there in the dead of winter to clear his head. They said he fell through the ice, got out, and then froze to death under a tree in deep snow. Believable, sad, tragic, and it killed me inside. A year later, they confessed the truth, that he was abusing his and his brother's daughters and was caught. So he ran away and died in the forest. For a year, I still thought the world of him and missed him, that he had just ducked up and froze in the wilderness. Nothing to be ashamed of, purely accidental and very sad. So I missed him terribly, and relived all our incredible fun adventures together in my head to make me feel better about his loss. But when I found out the truth, it gutted me, destroyed my soul. It sent me into a deep depression, and I could only help myself by turning that around and being grateful that he died. It's horrible what he left behind, and I realize he obviously wasn't well and needed help, but he's still a piece of crap and deserves what he did to himself. Story 49, my dad. I knew as a kid that he spent like 8 years in prison before he met my mom in the early 90s. He didn't talk about it much, but he said basically he beat up a guy that his high school girlfriend was cheating with. And the reason he got so much time was because the guy almost died and had some life-altering injuries. Obviously, that's bad enough, but I figured he'd changed. Recently, my boyfriend and I were looking up people we knew on different county websites to see if they committed crimes. I decided to look up my dad. Big mistake. On top of the assault, he was charged with kidnapping and armed robbery. Needless to say, it's been hard looking at him and talking with him the last couple months. Story 50. Caught my very religiously devout Mormon dad snuggled up with a stripper in his lap at the club. He didn't know I was banana tail serving at. I blew his crap wide open to my siblings, who told our mom, and in the fallout, it fell out that it wasn't a one-off. 40 years of strip clubs, street corners, and massage parlors, and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Story 51. One of my ex-BFs died in federal jail from pandemic awaiting trial for 4 charges of crimes against children. He and his weird little wife had at the time 8 kids, and 1 on the way. After he died in jail, her family tried to get her money to buy a house through GoFundMe. What a crap show. Story 52. For years, my mother has lied about who my father was. She made up a fake name to throw me off. When I became an adult, I later found out my mother hid who my father was because he was sleeping with men. To add insult to injury, after coming to terms and confirming the actual identity of my father, I'd later find he was dating a male best friend of mine. What a small world we live in. Story 53. One of my cousins said he desired me sexually. He also has gray hair and I'm in my 30s. I was in my early 30s when he confessed it. The worst part is, I found out he did this to one another cousin, but he comes off as safe to others. Got scared to visit that side of the family for a while. Story 54. I found out after the fact that while we were together, my ex faked an entire relationship. Sex, kissing, snuggling, I love yous and all, with a female friend of hers, just so she'd have a place to live. She told me at the time the friend was just doing her a favor. I was living with a roommate at the time and wasn't financially stable enough to move or get an apartment with my ex. So this was what she decided on. She was telling this woman that things weren't so good with me and I was mistreating her. Apparently, this woman had feelings for her and would believe everything that came out of my ex's mouth. Story 55. My disgusting gross uncle that is creepy and everyone hates to be near him, abused my aunt, his younger sister, when he was 18. Apparently, my grandparents knew and just swept it under the rug. This uncle gave me the heebie-jeebies my whole life. I always stayed away from him even before finding out he's a ducking monster. Now he's married to a preacher acting like he's a good Christian living his best life. Story 56. The ex-best friend admitted she was cheating on her BF of 6 years with some random guy she thought was way better looking and better in bed, her words. I told her I wasn't going to keep her secret and she needed to stop fooling around with her BF and tell him the truth. This led to a bunch of drama, her BF finding out, them breaking up, and her dating the guy she was cheating with for a year, up until she breaks up with him, because of course he cheated on her, and goes back to her BF. Yep, the one she cheated on took her back. And from what I hear from friends who still talk to them, they made me the villain in this story because I threatened to rat her out. And apparently, that was emotionally manipulative. Ridiculous. Story 57. My ex told me he hurt and blackmailed a lot of girls after we broke up and that it was my fault he did it. Also, he lied about his father dying so he could relate to me when I lost my dad at a young age, but his dad lived a block over from him. Story 58. Not so disgusting, really, judge for yourself. When I was a teenager, my father told me, just once, about how he was complicit in the euthanasia of his own father. His dad was living, dying, in their poor, working-class home in London, suffering from incurable diseases back in the 1960 ROS, screaming down the house in pain all through the night. His doctor used to come round every evening to give him a shot of morphine, and my dad was in the habit of helping him by holding down his father's arm, etc., and was roughly familiar with the dosage, etc. He said that one night when his dad was really bad, he was helping out the doctor and noticed that he pulled up a far, far larger dose than normal. His words to me went very close to, then our eyes met over his body, and in that silent moment a question was asked and an answer was given, all without words. The doctor inserted the needle and pushed the plunger, and my grandfather died soon afterwards of a massive morphine overdose. My dad wasn't a liar and was a very, very decent man, Story 59. Someone I had known for years. Very successful, well off, young guy who could have easily dated any woman he wanted. Kidnapped a woman, held her captive for days, abused and tortured her. He is currently out, after he did what he did. He then proceeded with his week as if it never happened. Took us out to drinks, went hiking. Very creepy, looking back now, being a woman alone with him in the woods. He wasn't caught until later. In the time after what he did, he even came on our girls' trip to Vegas to keep us safe. He was violent if men wouldn't leave us alone. He always played protector. He was always very nice, sweet, and charming. When he was being convicted and it all came to light, it was very shocking. Police came and talked to us all. He was also currently stalking another woman as his next victim, and they were trying to find out if we knew her. He was also investigated for multiple disappearances and murders, but nothing could be tied to him. He's out now and tries to text us happy birthday and Merry Christmas as if it never happened. Story 60. There was a coach on one of my high school teams who I had a big crush on. He was really nice to me and complimented my playing and lots of stuff. I ended up having to leave the team after a few months because I switched schools, and I didn't think much about him after that. Although sometimes I kind of laughed at myself for having such a big crush on him, but also thought about how nice and cute he had been or whatever. Just a few months ago, which would be about 5 years after I was on the team, I reconnected with one of the girls I was on the team with and found out he had been arrested and convicted of harassing and grooming many of the girls on the team, even assaulting one of them. I was horrified, and thinking back on it, realized that I had been being groomed. I was so lucky to have left the team when I did, or I would have been another one of his victims. Story 61. My friend that's 35. His dad is the biggest liar and takes it upon himself to spy on him through hidden cameras, listening devices that he's put around his home as he trusted him with a set for emergencies. He's changed his accounts and has access to everything in his phone, including texts, emails, passwords, photos, everything. Talks about transparency and being forthcoming. He's a hypocrite and he wants nothing to do with him. He's also been caught, but acts like he's just this innocent bystander and that he doesn't even know how to do any of that. He also watches 8 hours of YouTube a day and for DIY stuff. I feel bad because my friend is looked at by everyone like he's crazy, and he's going through a really rough time already. Then to have family do something as insidious as this. He's mentioned wanting to just be done with life, and I'm trying to do anything I can to make him see that he doesn't need these people in his life. He can choose his family that would never do this to him. I feel for him. Story 62. My college school choir teacher was abusing multiple female students. He was married with a pregnant wife and super into his Christian church. He gave me a ride, just the two of us. I was his new teacher's pet. One of his victims was his old teacher's pet. I think he was grooming me. I had no clue at the time. He was arrested a couple months after that ride as a victim came forward after graduating in prison. He started a men's choir and was suddenly saved by Jesus after being a Christian his entire life. Story 63. I found my undergrad Tay on Megan's Law for possession of CP, his mugshot and everything. I distanced myself from him when everyone was doing group outings and never told anyone. Story 64. Not disgusting, but at the time freaked me out because it was the first time an adult had to explain a very serious concept to me. There was a kid in my class who was a little weird. He always took a liking to me, and I was polite, but we weren't really friends. One day, he walked up to me in the middle of recess and said, "My grandfather has been molesting me." I did not know what to say or know what that meant. What I did know was that I needed to tell an adult. So I did. And of course, parents and police got involved. His grandfather was his main caregiver. We'd see him at school drop off and pick up daily. He died of a heart attack shortly after he was exposed. I still wonder how that kid is doing today and hope he healed and is living a normal life. Story 65. There were rumors at work that a guy that I met and got on really well with had been caught watching CP. I thought I knew him quite well at this point, so I was saying to some of the guys, instead of talking crap behind his back, just ask him if you're so confident. Also, when asked if I thought he was the kind of guy to do it, I just said, I don't know him that well, but he seems like a GC, so I would be surprised if it's true. Turns out it was true. He was done in court for having hundreds of videos and photos of CP. Somehow he missed going to jail for it. No surprise, NZ has a weak justice system. But I thought I knew him well. Turns out he was into the most disgusting and depraved crap. Story 66. An odd late 30 AS, early 40s woman we worked with saved all of her used menstrual products in paper bags. Literal years of pads and whatever else stacked to the ceiling in a shower stall in a bathroom in her house. Story 67. A guy I went to junior high with was always one of the girls and used to braid hair and stuff in class. Later, I found out he used to steal their hair ties whenever hair got tangled in them and wear them as a CK ring while he doing himself good. Story 68. My aunt allowed her first and second husband molest my cousins. I only found out 2 years ago when my mom told me we were having a visitor that day. It was a woman who turned out to be my cousin and one of the victims. She ran away because the second husband threatened to impregnate her, and not one person searched for her all these years. including my mother. Instead, the aunt allowed him to abuse on my younger cousins. I was completely disgusted. It broke my heart knowing that one of my female cousins used to spend a week at my house every summer, and she never told us what was going on. She passed away at 21. The long-lost cousin told me the deceased cousin was definitely molested. No wonder why no one spoke at my aunt's funeral. I'm glad she's dead. Story 69. I was dating this guy for 7 years. He was a typical covert narcissist, and in one of his attempts to keep me from leaving, he tried to get pity from me by telling me about how he would assault his sister when he was a tween and hide it from his parents. They now have an interesting relationship where she treats him as though he's the younger brother and needs taking care of. He's 35. Story 70. There was a rumor at my HS that a staff member's father was arrested and imprisoned for abusing young women. I Googled that staff member's name, and his father's history popped up instantly. It was wild and sickening. No one at school liked him that much, but learning that information just made me sad for him. Story 71. In 2022, my dad died. Left no note to his wife, stepmom of 16 plus years, kids, family, or really anyone, but did leave a note for his already deceased dog, just said "see you soon," and a list of bills for my stepmom to pay and advised her to file for bankruptcy. Because he's racked up 2 hidden credit cards with about $90K of crap. To find out he spent the money on and prostitutes, which I didn't even know you could pay that way, but whatever. So yeah, didn't go to the funeral, didn't pick up his ashes. What's the point? Story 72. I was talking to a woman on a dating app, and before we met, she told me nonchalantly that she let her dog lick her down there. I didn't reply and just blocked her and deleted the conversation. Story 73. One of my best friends from my teenage years was molesting his cousin that his parents babysat all the time. His older sister caught him, and despite her family strongly discouraging her from doing so, she got law enforcement involved, and he was eventually charged, tried, convicted, and did a woefully short amount of time in prison. He tried getting in contact with me after he got out of prison. I told him to leave me alone, to duck off and die, or I'd help him do the latter, and that I was literally deadly serious about it. The only reason I've been able to move on from the situation after finding out about it was him doing a botched job of hanging himself shortly afterwards, but being successful enough to remove himself from existence. Story 74. Guy I used to party with in high school turned out to be a molester. He was such a laid-back and handsome guy, had no problem getting girlfriends. He ended up on the run from the law is how we all found out. Not sure how he got caught. Either way, duck that piece of crap. I hope he serves the worst and longest sentence possible. Story 75. My uncle's brother-in-law and father-in-law abducted and murdered a young woman in the early 80s and dumped her in the desert. The brother-in-law took the fall for the whole thing, and the father-in-law never did any time. We used to have birthdays, holidays, at my grandparents' house, and the father-in-law was never allowed inside my grandparents' house or at family functions. I never understood why until I became much older and was told about the whole situation. My uncle eventually divorced his wife, and we haven't seen or heard about his ex-wife's family since. Story 76. She abused my friend, assaulted my guy friend, and called me racial slurs, and also cheated on someone with a guy 22 years older than her and her ex-boyfriend. Story 77. Met my biological mom when I was 16. I'd been separated from her permanently as a toddler, but when I met her, she seemed so sweet. After knowing her for a while, she would tell me stories of her past, parts including me as a baby. 4 out, she would leave me, baby female, alone for days with her addict boyfriends, and would tell me these stories laughing about how I was mad when she came back. I've struggled with mental issues my entire life, and I can't help but suspect her immature actions play a part in this. Story 78. Recently found out the dad of a childhood friend got busted by the feds, like FBI blazers raiding house in the middle of the night for CP. I remember being at the kid's house when I was really young and the parents seemed super normal. Fast forward 15 years though. Seemed to mess the kid up. Saw him in a news article shortly after that where he brought a gun to school and was arrested. Kid seemed pretty angry at the whole world. Story 79. When I was 9 months old, my father went to a house to help his friend get something back that was stolen. When he showed up at the trailer, a fight broke out between my dad and the other men. Someone walked up to him while his back was turned and shot him. He was only 30 years old. No one was ever arrested. The case still remains cold. Story 80. My grandpa used to mentor kids, teenagers, in a Big Brother type of program. One of the teenagers ended up molesting my dad, but my grandpa did not believe him until he walked in on them. Even then, he never got the teenager in trouble. He just stopped seeing him. Story 81. My former workmate accidentally revealed to me that he lived double lives. His wife, in the same city state that we're currently at, is very close to me, never knew about it, and they have a chilst. The other one in a neighboring state, but in a suburban location about to give birth. He even asked me to keep it to myself about this. Turns out, he still lives his double life to this day. Story 82. When my husband and I were dating, I had a good relationship with his brother. But as the years passed, I started having this weird feeling in my gut about him. We wouldn't ever let our kids go to his house or spend any time alone with him. It's a good thing we didn't, because we found out he had been abusing his stepson for many years. He only turned himself in because other kids were coming forward with their own stories about him. Story 83. Nothing surprises me when it comes to the human brain. You think about it, there is a human who does it. Sometimes it's your own family members. Other times it's someone you don't even know. I was given a hot tip after my surgery about what my old boss was saying about me. It made me very angry. I loved working for him. Story 84. I found out there's Sam of me out there, and then learnt my mom knew about the abuse and did nothing, didn't get me therapy, just did nothing. She doesn't know I know. But my sister and I mentioned something about the house I was abused in being on the news for being a house of horrors, and my mom turned around aggressively and screamed, "Are you implying you were abused? Well, you were the one who kept asking to go there." I was 5, 11 years old. So gross. Story 85. Posted elsewhere a few years ago, disgusting in that he was what we thought was a devout Christian. When my grandfather died, a whole other family turned up to his funeral from interstate. They didn't know about us, and we didn't know about them. My uncle and his new half-brother looked like twins. Crazy thing was that we all got along so well that we went out to lunch afterwards. My grandmother died a few weeks before him, and we don't think that she ever knew. Story 86. I used to work at fairs for my uncle. My uncle is a great man. The Pepsi guy used to take my sister and I, 11 and 12 at the time, for tours of the fairgrounds. The Pepsi guy would ask us all kids of weird questions and asked if we would want to go off grounds with him. We finally told my uncle and John Pepsi guy didn't die, but I'm pretty sure my uncle threatened his life and I never saw him again. Story 87. At my high school, a kid of a coach, 12D, another abused kid, 7, and the principal tried to stop the dad of the poor kid reporting to the police by threatening to fire him. It was a huge shock to our HS, because the father of the victim was an extremely loved teacher among every student. We all found out at graduation when he didn't show up and asked trusted students to spread word of what happened. Truly a tragedy. Story 88. I had a classmate back in college who I spent a lot of time having lots of fun with, getting into all sorts of whimsical mischief, having great conversations, but he moved away before graduating. I looked him up a number of years later to reconnect, but had a really hard time finding anything about him anywhere. I tried and finally had success in discovering that he was in prison for a very long time as a repeat sex offender. Story 89. That my father abused my aunt, and then told her he'd murder her if she ever told anyone. Found it in court documents when I was like 16. It was all allegedly, so the court system didn't care. My aunt never came with her actual statement. She just confided in my mother. Come to find out later on, he tried to my abused other aunt when she was drunk. I believe all of it. He's not a good man. Story 90. Why my dad had trouble keeping jobs for longer than a few years at a time after he got out of the service. He kept getting caught in the doing himself good at the office. Probably why he works from home now. Story 91. That the person who molested, abused my ex for over a year out of our 2 5-year relationship was nothing but her imagination. She lies to everybody, about everything, all the time. Story 92. An ex-friend sold her op and benzo scripts to friends hoping they'd get addicted and keep coming back, she told me this, to fund her IVF procedure. Story 93. Well, we found out that the principal pastor of the mega-church Christian school got arrested for taking phones from people and uploading any spicy pictures to his own phone. Not sure if these were photos of adults or students, but it was serious enough to get the cops involved. Not a lot of details, but it was in the local news. Story 94. An ex-coworker of mine was a giant asshole. One day during break, I was complaining about his language toward like 80% of the staff. I Googled him quick, figuring I'd find a Facebook, etc., and all kinds of racist or plain horrible crap he has said online. Well, before the Facebook popped up fourth in the search results, I found out he was awaiting sentencing for possession of CP. Story 95. My dad told me a story about a man living in our neighborhood in the 1920s and 30s who used to molest many boys, including my grandfather. Made me really sad to hear that my grandpa told my dad the story in passing and said it was just the way it was back then. Those boys didn't deserve that. Story 96. My grandfather killed and abused several people in my family, including my grandmother. He also attempted to kill my dad when my dad was just a toddler and then abandoned him with no family left to care for him. The name I knew him by was not even his real name. I found all this out after he died. Story 97. When my friend, M, has to pee in the middle of the night, he goes in his bathroom sink instead of the toilet. He also admitted to not regularly cleaning his bathroom sink. Story 98. A married couple I used to work with and have since fallen out of touch with were recently convicted of child abuse and sentenced to multiple decades in prison for it. They'd taken in a relative's child, not sure they legally adopted or not, and took to abusing her, withholding food, physical beatings, etc. You think you know someone, and then this sort of thing happens. Story 99. I searched a friend's name on Facebook and found a photo of him wearing a diaper and a post saying he was looking for a mommy on a weird-ass fetish page. Story 100. My biological dad punched my mother in the stomach when I was in her womb. He is Vietnam vet, lived a 1% or motorcycle gang life, and he is going blind and dying on dialysis 3 times a week. Should I visit the guy? He stole 2 guns from me when I was only 22 years old. That's my ducking disgusting secret. Story 101. I found out that our security guard at our residential complex was in jail for 6 years for battering and killing his wife and child. The person that hired him has the attitude of he did his time. Did he really? Story 102. A coworker used to microwave fish every day for lunch. Turns out he didn't even like fish. He just did it because he knew it annoyed everyone. The office villain we never saw coming. Story 103. I don't know if it's disgusting, but definitely shocking. My neighbor, a 50-something white lady with 2 daughters, was arrested one day. She had always been really sweet to my kids. Her husband brought her home the next day. When I looked up her record, it said she was arrested for strangulation.